Welcome back to functions. In this lesson, we're going to look at parameters and multiple arguments. So arguments are the parameters when they get passed in to the function, and we look at them within the syntax of the function, so then they're known as arguments. So it's the same thing. Function parameters, so they're inside the parentheses. And as we saw, that arguments received by the function when it's invoked. So we've got the parameter when it's coming in, and then also it's known as an argument when it's being invoked. So it's the same thing, but different names for it. The function can also have multiple parameters. So we can have parameter 1, 2, 3. Notice that they're comma separated, and the structure is the same, where we still have that code that's being executed. So you can also pass in default arguments. So there's a number of ways to do that, and I'm going to be exploring those as well. So we've got some examples here. So by default, now with the newer version of JavaScript, we do have an option to have a parameter and equal to a value. So that can set the value. And before, if we want to be more compatible with older browsers, there's some other ways to do that as well, where we can do a conditional statement here, so that if num2 is undefined, then it will equal 5. So we've got the value of num2 or 5. So this is another way to set a default. Type of num2, and if type of num2 is undefined, we use a ternary operator. So there is a challenge for this lesson. So using your knowledge of the earlier lessons, create 3 different ways to set a default value if a function is missing an argument value. They should all produce the same output. And we just showed you that there are 3 different ways to do that. So go ahead, pause the video, open up your editor, and try it out. And it's also important here to practice passing in those arguments, taking those values, and then making use of them within the code. So let's set up 3 different functions, and we can call them whatever we want. In this case, we're going to call it adder1. So this one is going to take number 1. It's going to take number 2. So just like on our example, and we want to set a default value for number 2. So we are using a more modern browser, so we do have access to use the default argument. So we can set it with an assigned value of 5. So in this case, we'll output both those values as into the console. So we can have number 1 can be equal to whatever the value that's being passed in of number 1. And then the other one in the console is going to say number 2 is going to be whatever value of number 2 is being passed. A few functions that are going to run. So in one case, we can pass in 100 and 100. So we pass in both of the arguments. And then in the other case, what we'll do is we'll just pass in 100 and see what happens. Oh, and we got to still correct that. So that should be 2. So let's see what the output is. So refresh. We're getting number 1 as 100, number 2 as 100, and in this case, we didn't pass in a second argument, but we are getting that default of 5. So you could also do something where you've got a default for both of them, and if you're not passing in anything, then you can see that that result is the same. So you do have that option. So the other one that we wanted to do is we wanted to do another function, and we can call this one adder2, and this is going to take in those same 2 arguments. And this is for older versions of browsers that might not have this default argument value here, where we're going to use a conditional statement to check to see if num2 is equal to a value. So if there is a value here, then it's just going to assign that value. If there's no value there, then it's going to assign the value of 5 to it. And we can try that in this case as well. So just update this to number 2. And in this case, we do need to pass the first argument. And you can see that it sets a default for the second one. And we'll try one last one. And this is the one that's also more commonly used as well, where we actually check the type of number 2. So we do type of number 2. And if the type is not equal to undefined, then all we do is we just output number 2. So that means that there is a value there. Otherwise, we're going to set a value of 5, and we'll try this one out as well. And I'll update this to 100. So we refresh it, and you see in this case, we do pass 100 and 100, and then this one is equal to 100, and the second value is being set by default. So coming up, even more on functions coming up in the next lesson.